Hi, Dr. Fan. Tom again. Great to see you, as always.
My pleasure to come back.
Thank you. So we had finished talking about the psychometric test, which I think people are going to find very interesting. But the other topic I want to make sure we got a chance to discuss is the use of other types of tests. And they're used oftentimes at lower level selection levels. For instance, there are a lot of people who use Microsoft software, so they use Word or PowerPoint or Excel or database applications, and people who are going to be hiring them want to know what level of skill they have because they don't want to necessarily spend a lot of time training them to do something they think they already have. And then, there are other types of what we call work sample tests that are basically built off the same template as um, assessment center exercises. People are given either an in-basket exercise or a problem case that they have to solve, and then the interviewer basically comes in a role play environment and asks them questions about what they did or didn't do and why they did what they did or why they reached the decisions that they did. The example I used to use from years and years and years ago when I would hire salespeople is to give them some information and require that they read it over for 5 minutes and then use the information they had to make a presentation to me, convince me to use a product or a service. So those types of things which came out of the assessment centers were very valuable because there were samples, right? It's an example of now you can kind of see what the candidate's capability is right in front of you right now. So they've always had a relatively high degree of reliability and validity on face validity. But face validity, as you and I both know, is it doesn't mean much. It's not a scientific term. It's how comfortable am I with this? Do I believe that this thing that we're using is worthwhile or not? But there's not a lot of science behind it. So I'm always a little leery when people talk about. I actually had somebody describing the test to me one day, said it has one of the highest space validities we've ever measured. And I'd love to hear more about that. How did you measure it? So, well, it's likes, right? So, anyway,
I think the concept of face validity is really speaks to the acceptance by job candidate or test takers. I agree with you. It does not have much scientific, utility, but for make candidates feel comfortable with something that's being selected on is a factor to consider.
Right. But relative to all the other types of reliability, it's not the most important thing. Anyway, so back to work sample tests. I think that the work sample test, work simulations, in-basket exercises, problem solving, sales presentations. Years ago, when I was applying for a job, one of the things that they asked me to do was to come in and conduct a 1 hour training session. This was for a company that wanted to hire me, and so they wanted to see what my capabilities were in terms of introducing a topic, explaining it, engaging the group, facilitating a group, that kind of thing. So these things have been used many, many times and are pretty valuable, but they're very time consuming and quite expensive if you're going to be using them. So the structured interview and personality tests and cognitive ability tests, those three things tend to have supplanted the use of the assessment centers as a much faster and economical way to get at the same information. Anyway, so the skills test, certainly for lower level positions, administrative assistants, accountants, whatnot, checking to make sure that they can operate those systems and use them effectively, and the role that they're going to perform is fine. You always want to make sure, and I think you and I have talked about this before, that you don't give kind of a basic accounting test to someone who's going to be the CFO of your company. That would be, the opposite of face validity. For instance, it would be kind of an insult to ask somebody who has performed as a CFO to do a basic accountancy test.
Mm-hmm.
But these are all things that can, in the appropriate setting, add some value in the power of prediction in a selection context. So we're just going to talk briefly about some of those so people can perhaps better understand how and when they're used and why they're used. But in my view, most of them are used at lower level type jobs to demonstrate certain capabilities that are very targeted to that job.
Yes, I would like to offer a perspective of different kinds of selection methods. Talk about IQ test, personality test, structured interviews, assessment centers, work sample test, and those kind of things. I think in the literature, scholars try to differentiate two major types of selection method. One is sign-based, the other is sample-based. Things like IQ test, personality test, they are sign-based, which means the scores can predict performance. But the test takers engaging during the test does not seem to have direct relevance to the jobs, duties they're going to perform. So it's a sign, not the real thing, but they predict. Another type is sample-based selection method. That includes assessment center work sample test, because you ask people to perform a real piece of the work they're going to perform if hired. And that's why it's tend to have a little bit higher validity, but as you point out correctly, it's more time consuming, it's more costly to develop, and it's more costly to implement those kind of tests. But sometimes people just use those things and also can achieve pretty good validity.
Right. One of the problems, I used to write those things. I did them for several companies that I worked for. I used to write simulations, and then we benchmark them. We would give them to people who were in the job and see how, what things they identify and whatnot to make sure that the test was aimed at the appropriate level and going to have some validity in terms of predicting performance. So it is quite expensive to develop those things because it's not something you just pull on off the shelf and give it. You've got to make sure that it measures what you think it's measured. And the other thing is that the danger of using those things, once I started doing those for the company I was working for, I did it for finance, marketing, and planning and sales. And what happened was it became so interesting to the senior level head of the function, like the director of finance or director of marketing or director. They would come into the candidate review meeting, and the one question they would ask is, how did they do on the work sample test? So what did that tell you right off the bat? That he was getting a much larger portion of attention in making the decision that it deserves to have. It was a piece of the prediction puzzle, but it wasn't the whole thing. And what I found is that people tended to overweight it. So that, I think, is the downside of the danger of using those things, because they do have, as you were saying, a high degree of face validity. They have a high degree of face validity with the senior managers of the function and more hiring people. And that was the one thing that they felt they could really hang on to. It was something they saw, they knew, they understood, and they wanted to know how the candidate did on that. And that was the only thing they were asking about. So my view is that there's as much downside of using those things as there is upside.
I agree. As you point out cogently, people tend to, particularly those hiring managers, tend to overestimate the utility of sample-based tests because they think, oh, this is a real job, real test they're going to perform. But again, in work sample test, you cannot sample all the major job duties.
Exactly.
Translate that into a test. It's nearly impossible to do. You can give you a sample of what the person can do or may do if hired, but it's not complete picture. And that's why I always recommend, don't fix on one selection method. Try to use multiple selection methods using approach which we call triangulation.
Yes, exactly. So I think, for all those reasons, the sample tests have been valuable. My experience is that the one problem I ran into it is I had clients who overly relied on that one thing. And they are very expensive to develop. It would take me a long time. It would take me months to develop that kind of a thing. And then we had to test it to make sure that it was actually measuring what we thought it was measuring with the group of people we wanted to use it on. So that's my caveat. Be careful of those things because they tend to be overly relied on. The other types of tests that are used are basically on software or on, for instance, I've seen HR people get tested on PeopleSoft applications, on HRIS applications, and how familiar they are with those kinds of things. But again, to your point, you're kind of putting a lot of credibility on one aspect of their job, and it's really only one aspect of their job. So my feeling is they can be of value, they have a place, they tend to be at the lower level jobs to verify that people have the ability to use certain tools and help them do their job. But as you get higher and higher in the organization, the personality tests become much more relevant to executive position. So people just need to understand that not all tests are fit for purpose, and you've got to think carefully. This is where I think we always tell people, look, there are a lot of HR people who are not INO psychologists as we are. They are HR people, but they should also be knowledgeable enough about what INO psychology could bring, what the science could bring, to be informed consumers when they are going out to help the line managers set up a selection process and to use the appropriate instruments or tests or whatever as part of the selection process.
Yes, I totally agree.
Okay. So I don't have an awful lot to add to what I've said, other than I think we have to be very careful about using those things, that they tend to be most useful at the lower levels to prove or disprove certain competencies or capabilities with software or certain problem-solving abilities, and that's where they are most useful.
I agree. I would like to add that no matter what, the general principle of IO psychology remain the same when it comes to selection. For instance, you have to demonstrate validity, whether you use work sample test or Microsoft test or Microsoft Excel test, no matter what you develop, you come up with as a selection tool, you have to show that the scores on those tests, be it the personality test or work sample test or assessment center exercises, the scores on the selection should positively relate to job performance. And that does not change.
Right. And that's the concept we basically call validity. So in other words, what you're saying is that the results of this test correlate with successful job performance.
Mm-hmm.
Right. All right.
That's the bottom line.
That is the bottom line. And I think once we've reached the bottom line, I think we're done. So thank you very much.